Thank you for joining us this morning. We're here on the east coast of Australia. A bit of a rainy day, so we won't be opening up a beehive today, but it's live Q&A. So if you've got questions, beekeeping, flow hives, anything to do with harvesting honey, then put your questions in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. We're going to harvest a little bit of honey while we answer those questions. First of all, we're going to have a look in the windows and just see what's going on inside the hive. So if you come up here, you can actually see the bees standing on top of their honeycomb, and the honeycomb is capped. You can see the wax sheet there standing on. And if you compare that to the other side, let's have a look. Now this hive we've harvested a lot from this spring, and on this side you can see that the honey isn't quite ready. You can see the white capping they've put on the frame, but down here we've still got a lot of open cells, a lot of nectar glistening down them. They're still going through that amazing process of dewatering it, getting it ready to put their capping on. It's kind of like the lid on a preserving jar. That's when the bees are saying that honey is ready to store for a long time, and that is when it's ready to harvest as well, because we want it to store for a long time on the shelf. Now, lucky for us, they make more than they need and we can share some too. So there's a lot of honey coming in this springtime. So let's just pick a frame and take out their little caps, top and bottom. We will just take the lid off our jar and put it here. And then there's a little tube like that that goes right in there. Don't forget to put the tongue into the little slot at the bottom of the frame. And same over here. I'm picking the next frame in because I could see the edge one on this side wasn't quite ready to go. If you have a look at this, you can see that these cells are nice and full, and you can even see down between them and see the capping that the bees have put on the frames. This hive's doing very nicely. Any questions, put them in the comments. I'm just going to start with harvesting this honey. And the idea is we're just answering your questions and helping you get started in this amazing pursuit of beekeeping. I'm just going to put the key in and give that a turn, like that. And what that does is it forms channels inside the comb and allows the honey to flow down to the trough at the bottom and out. It's my father and I's invention that we worked for a decade on, and it's now been out in the world for 7 years. So we've got people all over the world harvesting honey with our flow hives. This frame's actually quite easy to turn. Sometimes it's tough, sometimes it's not, but there we go. It really depends how the bees have waxed or propolized up all of the little moving parts inside the frame. There's 80 or so parts to each frame, and they move in such a way that channels form inside the comb. You can see that honey coming down the tube now and into the jar, and it looks like we've got a beautiful light coloured honey. I'm just going to taste that. Wow, wow, that's amazing. Each honey is so different, different flavours, different colours, and it's a really nice thing to isolate frame by frame so that you get the different flavours and are able to share those flavours with your family and friends. Same thing, I'm just turning the handle like this again, and pretty soon we'll have some honey coming into this jar as well. Any questions coming in? Tracy's going to read them out, and meanwhile we'll just marvel at the gorgeous sight of honey coming straight out of the hive into your jar.
Seeds, great. Question coming in from Robin, wondering what's a good distance to have between your hives, and is there anything that is too close?
Okay, commercial beekeepers tend to put them wall to wall so that you can be right up against each other as far as the bees are concerned, but it's actually better with a flow hive to have a bit more space than we've got here. The reason why these are a bit congested is actually because we keep splitting them, but we'll move these hives further down the hill and get back a nice space. It's just more comfortable to get in here and look in the windows, and also to work your hive when you go through your routine brood inspections. Look at this. This is a classic example of how you can get multiple different flavours from one hive. We've got a very light one here showing this beautiful amber colour, and then we've got a dark, more multicolour here, and the flavours will be there to match. Yeah, exactly as I thought it would be. That's the more multicolours of the winter heathland here, and the multi-flavours go with that same colour. And here we've got it's the floral bursts of the springtime. That is incredible. It's like flowers condensed into a jar, which is exactly what it is. Perhaps the bees have collected from up to a 10-kilometre radius, bringing all of that honey, all of that nectar back into the hive and doing their amazing work, condensing it down, making this beautiful thing we call honey. Now, there's no further processing it needs. Only gravity has got it from the hive. It hasn't touched any machinery, hasn't been adulterated in any way. This is just the bees doing their amazing work, and we're harvesting it in the freshest way possible.
Great. Seeds M's asking, has found that sometimes the window can look quite full, but the centre of the frame still seems to be uncapped. Just wondering, you always check the frames first, and is it something we ever do?
Okay, so as you go on, you'll get more experience. Now, of course, we've designed this system so that you can harvest honey like this without having to go through the process of pulling all the frames out. Once upon a time, we pulled all the frames out, we took them back to a processing shed, and we cut the capping off, and we went through that process. But it's ideal if you don't even have to do the pulling the frames out bit. Now, having said that, by all means get in there and have a look and learn what's going on. But as you get more experience, you'll start to understand when it's likely to be capped in the centre. When the bees are hungry, they tend to start eating away the outsides, and you'll get this kind of checker pattern here where there's full cell, empty cell, empty cell, like that. As opposed to when you see it here with there's a whole lot of cells of similar sizes, they're building it out. So that's showing a filling pattern. However, if they were getting hungry, as you say, you could get into the situation where they've eaten out the honey directly above the brood nest. Now, bees need honey to feed to their young and themselves. So the obvious spot is right above the brood nest. They jump straight up there and start eating out, often a bit of an archway just above the brood nest. But as soon as the nectar flow comes on again, they'll fill in that area. So you'll start to learn when the nectar flow is on and when it's more likely to be full all the way through. Having said that, if you're not quite sure and you still want to harvest a bit of honey, then as you say, you could harvest the ones closer to the edge. And then as you see them filling up again, then you'll be pretty sure that they also have filled the middle ones above the centre. The end frame view here gives you a pretty good idea, but combined with the side view, you can then get a decent picture of what's going on inside your hive, and you'll learn when it's the right time to harvest. Don't worry too much if you don't get that right and you do harvest some honey that isn't capped yet. That just means it'll be quite liquid in the jar. The moisture content will be a little bit higher, and that means that fermentation could occur. So it just means you'll need to enjoy that honey or consume it instead of keeping it on the shelf for months and months. You can also make honey mead with honey that is too high in its moisture content. Commercial beekeepers mix it with other honeys to get an average moisture content so that it doesn't ferment. There's a few things you can do, but the main thing is don't be too afraid to experiment and learn about your hive.
Great. Oh, this is amazing, see how they're pretty much filling at the same time, aren't they, these two jars? And it's quite a cool day.
It is quite a cool day, but the bees keep their hive warm. So down here we have a brood nest kept just below body temperature, about 35 degrees C, and that warmth flows up to the top. However, in really cold times, you do get cold frames on the edges that often go a lot slower than this. Here we are, 10 minutes or so, and we've already got a lot of honey out of just 2 frames from the hive.
Beautiful. Alice is asking, Cedar, she has a hybrid hive, and I'm not quite sure on this question, wanted to know how often you thought she should rotate the frames from the brood box up into the super.
Okay, here we have the hybrid hive over here, so you can come and have a look at what she's talking about. Now, this has got a beautiful paint job on this hybrid hive here. It's called a hybrid because on the edges we have the honeycomb frames like this. So that's just a conventional wooden frame, and the bees have filled that in naturally with their comb. And we've got 2 of them on the edge, and then right in the middle we have our flow frames here. Now they is where you can tap off the honey in the middle. So that's a hybrid is what it's called, and it's something, especially if you want the more cost-effective hive, you can get the hybrid on our website. Now, the question is, how often do we change frames from the bottom to the top here? Now, with the hybrid, you can do that because these are the same size frames as the ones down the bottom. Normally, beekeepers will be doing their spring management, and that's when they'll be doing some rotation of the frames. So down here, you'll be taking some of the frames that are on the edge. Typically, they are just all full of honey, and you can then swap that for one of these ones up here. And what that does is it just freshens up the brood box with some nice, fresh, newer wax. And the idea is you cycle frames from the centre, put them out near the edge, wait till the brood has emerged from that frame, and then you can move them up if you want to. Or in a flow hive 2 or classic, where you just have the full rack of the flow frames here, you can't move them up. But it doesn't particularly matter because you can simply just take that frame out of the bottom here and cut out the wax and put it back in again. So instead of rotating, you simply just cut and remove, and you might enjoy that honeycomb to chew on with your family. Nice.
Robin's asking, Cedar, do you ever check the moisture content before you take the honey, or just deal with it afterwards?
No, we don't check it before we take the honey because you can't really, you can just see whether it's capped or it's not capped. And if it is capped, then the moisture content is as low as the bees are going to make it. It's not going to get any lower once they've put the capping on. So it's not very easy to check beforehand. Now, sometimes you get bees that don't bring the moisture content down that low. You can even, especially in the more tropical regions, the bees can have a hard time getting that moisture content down below that 20% range. And down around 18 or lower is actually ideal for honey on the shelf. And sometimes the bees will actually have a higher moisture content in those humid areas where they just have trouble getting that moisture content lower, or perhaps they're just feeling a little bit lazy about it, like we do sometimes.
Check our moisture content. Cedar, Wesley's asking, he's in Southern California, got any beekeeping tips for the arid southwest of Southern California?
Okay, so if you've got beekeeping tips for that area, please chime in below. We do have a lot of flow hive beekeepers in that area, so there's lots and lots of people with flow hives, and I'm sure they've got all sorts of knowledge to share. If you're online, please chime in. It's amazing how versatile bees are. They will be in really dry, arid climates. They'll be in really wet climates. They'll be in the snow, in very cold, freezing conditions. They'll be in the hot deserts, and amazingly, they can handle all of those different environments. They will bring moisture to fan, to cool the hive. They're amazing little air conditioning. They use evaporative cooling techniques to cool the hive down when it's hot. And when it's cold, they will disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate and become heater bees, they're called, and they'll warm the hive. So that way, they're able to be in all sorts of environments, out in the farms, on the rooftops, in the cities, in the snow, in the desert. It's quite cool.
Nice. So does Zach notice when you opened the flow frames, he's saying he saw you doing 3 turns at different depths. I'm assuming you don't suggest to go all the way back and just do one big turn.
Sometimes you can, and it depends on the strength of your arm and how the bees have actually waxed up all their parts. So generally our advice is make it easy for yourself. Just do it in a few segments like that. Come back to a 90, go in a little bit further and go again. I'll just show you that again. So I did it in about 3 movements. You're very observant there, like this, and turn, in again, and turn. And that just makes it easy, especially if you've got children doing it. You might only just put it in a little ways like that, steady it for them, and they can have the joy of turning the tap and starting the flow of honey. However, this frame was actually quite easy. I could have done that one in one go, and this one was firmer. So it really just depends on the propolis content of the wax and how much the bees have put in it, and that's largely genetics that determine that. I've got a little bit of rain here, so we're going to cover up our jars for a different reason than usual. The bees aren't coming around and going for the honey. Sometimes they can if they're hungry, or if someone's left some honey out and the bees have got into a robbing frenzy. But we've actually got a bit of rain here, so that's why we're not doing any show and tells actually inside the beehives today. But we can simply just cover up the jar like this. And this is a wax wrap, so it's beeswax and some oils on a cloth. You can make them, or you can purchase them, or you can use a piece of plastic kitchen wrap as well. And these are neat because you can reuse them. You can also use them for sandwiches and kids' lunches, and they're a reusable piece of kitchen wrap. And that way, no rain's getting in.
Perfect. Cedar M's asking, when you crack the whole frame, do you ever get leakage from overflow into your bottom channel?
You know, that's very rare, I think. Now, some people say that they like to just open a segment and wait a little bit to make sure that this doesn't fill up. Now, if you were going to see it, you'd see it coming out here. Now, sometimes they don't cap this very bottom area there, and if it was overflowing, this is the lowest cell right in this corner. You'd see it coming out. So you can keep an eye out for that, but it's pretty unusual. When you do get spills inside the hive, it's usually just the way they've capped the honey further up, and they usually come from up higher, so it's not that issue of overflow of trough that you're talking about.
Tim's asking, Cedar, does the honey need to be filtered of debris?
The amazing thing is, and it was quite a win really, that it just comes out perfectly clear and ready for the jar. Occasionally you get a few little floaty bits in it, but that doesn't really matter at all. That'll just float to the top and you can scoop it off if need be, or not. But have a look at that. It's perfectly clear. There is nothing to speak of in the honey. It is ready for the table or ready for your roadside stall. My son is just gearing up. He's caught a swarm, he's done a split, he's 7 years old, and he is going to sell the honey from his hives at a roadside stall, make some money to buy some Lego.
Is he going to do a GoFundMe page?
And no, he's away. He's seeing the light of freedom, of having some finances of himself to make his own choices. So watch this space. You'll get to see him enjoying getting his roadside stall together.
We might have to do a Facebook Live with him, I think.
That's right.
Jim's tuning in from one of my favourite places, Crescent Head. Hi, Jim. Just wondering, he's saying that his hives are really strong, but each time he gets a store of honey in the super, the bees are swarming. Going, what can I do to prevent them from swarming?
Okay, springtime here in Australia, Crescent Head, beautiful spot. A lot of flowers will be out at the moment. And what you'll probably find is you've got quite swarmy genetics in your hive. Now, it can be annoying if your hive swarms before they've actually filled the top box. Happens sometimes. What commercial beekeepers often do, if they catch a swarm, is actually replace the queen for known genetics that are less likely to swarm, very productive, and also keep the hive nice and clean of pathogens. And they're the traits that they'll breed for. So if you find it's causing a problem and they're very swarmy, then order in a queen from a queen breeder And what you need to do is find the queen in the bottom box, get some help from an experienced beekeeper if you're not up to that yet, and you'll take her away. 24 hours later, you insert the new queen into the hive. You can do that through the entrance if you lift the box a little bit off the bottom board. In warm climates, it's okay to do that, or you can go back in and place it between the frames. But basically what will happen is that queen, and she comes with 5 escort bees in a little cage with a block of candy at the end. A day or two later, she'll be released into the hive as the bees chew away that block of candy, and by that time the hive will be used to her pheromone. That new queen will then take over as the egg layer in the hive, and a month later you'll have completely different genetics that hopefully are less swarmy.
Great. Question, I've got a question coming on YouTube about whether, I'll just answer this one, if we sell the flow hives on Amazon. Not best to check without ringing our customer support team, because I know we did, but I'm not sure if we still do. So just be aware of what you're purchasing on Amazon. Thanks for that question. Craig's tuned in and said, I put the flow frames on a week ago and the bees have moved up into it to prepare. I put the flow frames on a week ago and the bees have moved up into it to prepare the frames. How often should I be checking the brood box this time of the year?
Okay, so typically you want to check your brood box at least a couple of times a year, going through every frame looking for disease such as AFB or EFB. Now, other than that, it's as needs basis, and people often are checking a lot more than that. And what you might be doing is, if you notice that one of your hives is a little bit low on bee numbers, you might wonder why, and get in there and have a look at whether you've got brood, or perhaps the queen's died and they haven't got around to making another one, your hive is queenless, or perhaps there's chalk brood or something like that slowing your bees down. Now, so the answer is, you could probably, if they're starting to work on the super, you could leave them be, just monitor them a bit and just check that the bee numbers look healthy, and enjoy the process of watching them get in here and deposit nectar with their tongues and fill up those cells. And then you might like to check them later on in the year by taking the brood box off and looking through the frames again.
Nice. Debbie's in Bega here in New South Wales, just having a few problems with the bees escaping between the flow frames and the metal strips. So it sounds like there's a bit of a gap there. Just wondering if you've got any tips on how to check that. She said she thinks the frames are as low as they can go, but there's just a little bit of a gap.
Yes. So the Araucaria wood is probably what you've got, and it changes size a lot. So when the moisture comes, it actually expands a little bit, and that can increase the size of the gap under the frames. Now, the very simple solution to that, and a very quick, easy one, is you can get something like the comb guides that come with our frames, and just snap it to size here, and just poke it right under the frames. And the bees will make it their own by putting their propolis here like this, and that will take up any space you've got under the frames if the bees haven't done it already by themselves. And that'll just mean you don't get bees coming out between this frame and this metal strip. So hopefully that works for you. Let us know if you have any trouble and we'll try to help.
Great. Naomi's asking, at what point do the bees begin to make and store honey in the super?
So it really depends on the time of year and the amount of nectar and pollen available, and the queen, how virile she is, how many eggs she is laying. So this was a split probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's about ready for the super. So on a day that's not raining, we'll take off the inner cover and put the super on the top box. The time to do it is when all of the frames in the bottom box have been drawn out, so they've connected their wax and to the top bar and built their beautiful comb hanging down in all of the brood frames. Once they've done that, you can go ahead and put the top box on. You probably wouldn't do it if it was a long time ahead with no flowers, i.e. in most places that's the winter. If it was coming up to the winter, you probably wouldn't put your super on, but all other times of year, when they have drawn out all the frames, on goes the super, and let them start going through the work of putting on their wax and drawing out the comb a bit further and doing their beautiful process. You can see it here in the window, where this is the side window of the flow frames, and they've done an amazing job of connecting their wax. They're joining all of the flow frame parts together, building their wax out further like that, and now they're filling them with their nectar that they're bringing in. Isn't it neat to be able to look in and see that?
Nice Marcella, and this is a bit of a sad one. They lost a hive due to the flooding in Torquay here in Victoria. But they're now debating on how high up we can raise the hives without risking other elements like wind exposure, etc. Just wondering if you've got any advice on that, Cedar.
Ah, that's sad.
Yeah.
I've had quite extreme weather here in Australia, and we had some pretty nasty floods around here, but sad to hear you're getting those issues there as well. Now, it's all about stability now. The hives, they're heavy, they don't usually blow over, so it's more about getting yourself a stable platform. Some people have them on their balcony in a multi-storey building. So if you are worried about wind though, you can always put a strap just around and down to an anchor point. And if you did have a cyclone or something like that coming, then you could certainly strap your hives down. But we find that you can have really strong winds here blowing up this slope, and we used to find that about 80 kilometres an hour wind, the roofs would blow off. So in the Flow Hive 2 we put a little bit extra down the sides, and that pretty well stops it, but we've also got these wing screws if you need them to do up and just secure that roof on to the box, and then it won't blow off. Caveat on that is if you just put your super on and the bees haven't waxed and propelled up the junctions between the two boxes, and you suddenly get a strong wind, then you could get the top box blowing off because it's not connected yet. But you know, a few weeks later, the bees have done a great job of really sticking the boxes together. In fact, so much so that you need the hive tool or chisel-like implement to lever them apart. They glue everything together. So that's the reason you don't really need to put on latches to latch the hive parts together.
Nice. Tizza, who's a regular tuning in, said they've got a case of foul brood in the area. I think they're down in New South Wales somewhere. They live about 10 k's out of town and was wondering if there was any way to protect their own bees from foul brood.
Okay, so there's been a lot of experimentation in the world with hygienic queens and AFB, American foul brood, and bees with very hygienic genetics can kick out foul brood from a hive. So the best defence is genetics, and if you really are concerned about it, then buy in a queen from a queen breeder who's breeding for hygienic traits, and then do what we were talking about earlier, where you change the queen over to the queen with the new genetics, and that means you're much less likely to get AFB. And I've interviewed beekeepers and I've learnt a lot about it, and it does work. Another way you can test if your bees actually are already hygienic is, you know, this is a bit more advanced and we should do a session on it one day. But we did a bit of this in our apiary a few years back, where you take out a frame of brood, and there's two methods. One is you use dry ice to actually freeze a little section of brood. The other one is you use a pin to pinprick a section of brood, so that one's a bit easier. And you mark that with a paint marker or something so you know where it is, and you put that straight back in, and a hygienic hive will remove that lot of brood with the pinpricks in it within 24 hours. And you can see what percentage they've moved and give your queen a rating if you want. So beekeepers that are having trouble with AFB go through this process of getting hygienic traits into their apiary, and it works quite well to change an apiary from battling AFB to kicking it out.
Nice. Cedar, James is just wondering what's happening with the Varroa mite over here, and also are they getting a handle on it? Have you got any updates on the Varroa mite?
So they're working very hard at the moment. A lot of beekeepers helping out, the DPI working hard, and the idea is they are creating these eradication zones around anywhere the mite travelled with the commercial apiary that moved around. And anywhere they found the Varroa mites, they then drew a radius around that and actually euthanized the hives in that area. So sadly, there's been a lot of hives and a lot of loss, and it's an incredible effort to protect this continent from the Varroa mite, and fingers crossed it's not in vain. And we can maintain Varroa free. We're the only continent aside from Antarctica that doesn't have the Varroa mite, and we'd like it to stay that way if possible. Having said that, if we do not gain control of it and it does become widespread, then it's not the end of the world. We just join the rest of the world in their treatment techniques to manage that pesky little mite. Yeah, so that's about where it's at the moment. I believe they're focusing on wild hives at the moment now, making sure that any wild hives in tree hollows and things in that area are also euthanized. So it's pretty sad. It's a big thing, and my heart goes out to beekeepers in that area who have had to go through that process.
Nice. Isaac's saying he got a 5-frame nuke on the for his Flow Hive 2 on Sunday. However, the frames had not been pushed tightly together, and so that when he did push them together, they were not happy. So he's just wondering, will they chew back the comb to reduce the distance, or should he keep the frames further apart?
They will chew it back, but what you risk if you push frames together that are already drawn out, and there's not enough space between the comb surfaces for bees to do their work and get between them, is you risk the hive beetles actually getting in there, taking advantage of not having bees chasing them around and laying their eggs. So if you've got a hive beetle in your area, then I wouldn't push those frames close together. If they're already drawn out, then they've done their work and you can just let them be spaced naturally apart. So just leave them as they are and allow the bees, you know, at least 6 millimetres between the comb surfaces if you can. If you've got a little bit of a bulge sticking out, typically at the top where they put their honey, you can get your hive tool and just knock that off, or a sharp kitchen knife. One of those serrated sharp ones is good, and you can just cut that little piece of comb off, let it drop down, the bees will recycle and use that, and then you can actually push the frames closer together. That's another option. Bees will fix any damage to the comb up very quickly in the hive, but what is more challenging for them is when you push honeycomb against honeycomb. Try not to do that.
Another question from Alice is, what's the general cause of chalk brood and how do you treat it? She hasn't watched the banana one.
So yeah, we do have one about myth busting, if you look up that, and it's all about chalk brood. If you want to have a good look at that video, there's 2 of them. One is putting bananas into the hive, and the other one is seeing what the results were from using the banana skin technique against chalk brood. Now, chalk brood, I actually just noticed some in a hive this morning, so follow me and I'll show you. So this little hive here, I was just having a look in this pest management tray. So down the bottom, and it's all a bit mucky, but you've got the cappings here showing that new bees are emerging. So they're actually, a lot of new bees are emerging into the hive, which is good. Population is building up in spring when you see a lot of that. But you also got these little chalky mummies. So have a look at that. That's what they look like. So it's great with a pest management tray because you might not necessarily notice this, but the tray collects them, and you can get a little bit of a reading on what's going on in the hive. So that's chalk brood, when you've got these little pieces of what looks like chalk. Now that's a spore producing bacterium that the bees can collect off leaves and anywhere out in the world, and what it does is actually, it's like a fungus taking over the brood before it actually goes through its metamorphosis. Now the treatment for that, first of all, is to move the hive into the sun so you don't have damp issues, because that can promote that more spore producing activity. But this hive is already in the sun, so we can't do that. So the next thing to do is, well, there's a few next things you can do. One is you can change the genetics of your hive to more hygienic. Now, we were talking about that earlier in terms of AFB. Also for chalk brood, if you've got a really hygienic breed of bees, they'll actually kick out that chalk brood quite readily, and that's often what a commercial beekeeper will do to manage chalk brood, is they'll change the queen. We talked about how to do that earlier. Now, another thing you could do is lessen the pathogen load in the hive by cutting out a lot of the brood frames. If you've got naturally drawn combs, it's a simple case of cutting out the wax and putting the frames back in. Now, you probably, depending on how bad the infestation is, you might move the frames to the edge first, let the brood emerge, then cut it out and let them start again. So you're freshening up the real estate down here for the queen to lay in, getting rid of that pathogen load and giving them a helping hand to get on top of it. Often bees will just get on top of it by themselves, but sometimes they struggle and it does slow down the hive. But it's not a reportable disease like AFB, where you actually need to destroy your colony depending on which country you're in. Chalk brood is something that you can manage, and hopefully your bees get back on their feet and the hive is away again.
Nice. Cedar, Rosemary had 2 queenless hives and just purchased 2 queens, has added them to the hives. Just wondering how long before they should check the hive to make sure she's been accepted and doing her thing.
Okay, the rule of thumb is wait at least a week. Now, it's hard to know what to believe, but that's what the common belief is: wait a week, because you don't want to stimulate the hive into balling the queen and killing her. Not sure if that's true or not. Chime in below if you've had experience with that. But there's all different ways of putting new queens in hives. Some people just let them walk in the front, others say no, they've got to be in the cage with the candy at the end, and so on. But if you put them in, wait a week, then get in there and have a look and check that you have indeed got some eggs in the bottom of the cells. It's also a bit easier if you wait a week or two to see the presence of the queen if you're having trouble finding her, because you can see the young larvae down the cells, and then you know the queen's in there doing her job.
Nice. Sage and Stone Homestead, what a great name, is wondering, and today's probably the perfect day, is it okay that we harvest the honey when it's a bit cold for the bees to fly, or do they need to wait for a nice warm day?
The great thing is about harvesting in this way, conventionally you would wait mid-morning to mid-afternoon on a nice warm sunny day to go through the process of harvesting honey, taking the frames out and taking them away. With this setup, you can harvest in the rain if you want. Like we were showing earlier, you might want to cover up the jars to stop the rain getting in. You can even harvest at night time, and that's something you couldn't do conventionally without a lot of fuss. Bees don't like you pulling apart their hive in the rain, they don't like you pulling it apart in the night, and they don't like you pulling it apart in the cold times. So harvesting honey, on the other hand, you can do. So that's a nice versatile thing of the flow frames.
Rufus has just installed a first nuke into the hive, and just wondering how long to leave them to settle in before doing the first inspection from the nuke that he's putting in.
So you've got a nuke, it's a going little hive, there's no real issue with inspecting them as much as you like. If you're using naturally drawn comb, then you'll need to inspect a little bit earlier than if you're using foundation. Reason being is you just want to make sure they're building straight on the comb guide. if you want to have a look at that, look at the last 2 Facebook live streams, and you can see me talking about naturally drawn comb and why you should check early if you're using that. But otherwise, once they are starting to draw straight, then away they go. You can leave them be for a while.
Nice. Laurie's saying they did rob the hive on Sunday. I guess they're meaning they took the honey out. And just wondering, they went down to the hive and it looks like now there's a swarm of bees on the outside of the hive. Is that natural or is something else going on?
Okay, sometimes if you've got a very busy hive, so if you look in the windows and it's hard to see the comb. Now have a look at this. We're harvesting honey now, and you see some perforations in the capping. Despite our design, the capping does get a little bit ripped sometimes, and you can see here it's all still solid and here it's moved. Now what you're seeing is a high moisture content now coming off that exposed honey, and the bees are working to reduce that. But if they need more space to get some more ventilation in the hive to help control the humidity and also to start to repair the comb, as you can see them doing here, they're right in there starting to chew away at the wax, go through their process of recycling the wax, reforming the cells, and to go again. They can't do that if it's wall to wall with bees. So what you sometimes get is when you're doing a harvest, especially if you harvest a lot of frames at once, is a bunch of bees vacating out to the front to allow some space in the hive for the repair work to get underway. So that's probably what you're seeing.
Nice. Jessica, you're asking a few questions, but they're great questions, but just contact customer support and they'll help you out with those bits and pieces that you're trying to sort out. Cedar, what do you think is a good hive for beginners to get started with, and what else do they need?
So a great thing you can do if you're just starting out fresh is grab our beginner bundle. Now that makes it a little bit more affordable as well, but also it gives you all the things you need. You do need a bee suit, you do need your smoker to look after your bees. If you don't plan on doing the bit of getting inside your hive and looking at the brood frames, you will need somebody else to come and do that for you. It is a requirement in beekeeping to do your brood inspections, and what we find is most people really enjoy and love that process and love that learning journey. So there's a few things you need: a bee suit, a smoker, your hive, which you assemble and paint with your favourite coat. So you might like to get a decking coat, that's what this one is, or you might like to get some house paints and have fun and getting artistic. And you put your hive together, you order your nucleus of bees from a bee breeder. So it's pretty unlikely bees will just come to your hive unless they're near a bunch of other ones. So that's called a bait hive. So you'll need to order bees in or take a split, and we've got videos showing you how to do those things. And you'll get in your bee suit, you'll get out your smoker, and you'll get those frames from your nucleus, which is a going little mini hive, and you'll put them into the bottom box. Look after them and they'll grow from there. So that's basically what you need to get started in beekeeping. Hive body, bee suit, smoker. The hive tool comes with that, and the gloves come with the bee suit when you order from our store. And then you'll need bees, and next piece of the puzzle is some learning material. So the beekeeper.org is a great spot for that if you want to sink your teeth into high quality video training material. Experts from all around the world have contributed to the beekeeper.org, and it is also a great fundraiser. We've planted 1 million trees so far to create literally billions of blossoms for bees to safely forage on. So it's a great thing, the beekeeper.org. Have a look. A lot of good learning there. People are loving it, and it's also just fantastic to support bees as well.
Nice. Cedar, what the properties of cedar, someone's asking that, not you, the properties of the timber cedar, wondering why would people use that, why would they purchase that one perhaps over the Araucaria, or are they both just good timbers to be using?
So the cedar is seen as the premium wood, especially in North America, where that's the one they're really familiar with. It's a bit lighter to lift. It has natural properties which repel things like mildew. Some people like to leave it just raw. Having said that, I'd still recommend painting the roof because it really does get a lot of elements on it. You want to seal it up with some good house paint on the roof. You could either leave this completely natural and just let it grey. That's something that some people like to do. Or use a decking coat which is made for outdoor timber to keep it looking like wood for a longer period of time. Now, if you're using the Araucaria wood, it will be disappointing if you try and keep it looking like this. It'll look good for a while with a clear coat on it, but it'll eventually look quite mildewy and mouldy like most other wood types in the world. So we recommend for the Araucaria to use a good quality outdoor house paint, just the kind of paint you'll get at your local hardware store, and you can get artistic with that or not, and that will be the best protection for the Araucaria hive. So it depends a little bit on what look you want, and also on I guess the other advantage of the cedar is it's just a little bit lighter to lift.
Great. Oh, sorry, just about blew my computer off there. Cedar, and talking about weather, just wondering, why is it when the weather's cool and windy and that you don't open up the hive?
So there's a few reasons. The first one is the bees get a bit grumpy. So on a nice, warm, sunny day, it's not too windy, that's when the bees will be the calmest. They're busy doing their work, foraging, and for a start, a lot of them are out in the field, so you've got less bees in there. When they sit around a bit like humans on rainy days, they start getting a bit stir crazy, and they're more likely to decide that the job they want to do is defending their colony from intruding mammals. So they're just a bit calmer on nice sunny days. But the next one is, if you are inspecting the brood, you want to be careful if it's quite cold. I mean, here we're in a temperate climate, you can pretty much pull out frames any time of the year and it's okay. But if it is freezing, then you don't want to pull out frames that open brood, so they've got their grubs down the cells, the larvae, because it can get a chill and actually die from cold. So that young larvae needs to stay at about 35 degrees or just below body temperature. And it's okay to get a little bit cooler than that, but you wouldn't want to get a lot cooler for a long period of time. So for that reason, we do our brood inspections on nice, warm, sunny days, but it's not always the case. You can't always wait for the weather, and you need to do some beekeeping. So you will see us beekeeping on days like this as well, preferably not when it's raining though.
Great. I love how our bee people just answer each other's questions, but James was saying that he had a bit of trouble getting the bees to draw and go into the flow frames. He pulled the frames out and brushed on some wax, and the next day they were all over fixing the frames up. But then Lee's come in, and I don't know if you've seen this, James, asked, and I'll ask you, Cedar, do you press the wax on with the tool or do you melt the wax?
I don't do any melting of wax. I'd find that unnecessarily. In fact, I don't do any preparation to the frames. I just put them on the box and wait till the colony is ready to use them. When they need it, they'll start using it. However, if you are getting impatient and you want to hurry that up, perhaps you've got a really short beekeeping season with the flowers that only flower for a few months of the year, and you just want to give your hive the best chance to get in there, then you might like to add some wax. Now, the easiest way to do that is you get your hive tool. If your brood box is actually ready for the top box, they will have started building wax up on top of the frames. Scrape some of that off and just press it into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frame. You're just literally scraping it off and applying it. Now, do it to a frame on the window side, and you can enjoy watching them do that process of recycling that wax, and it'll get them started on that frame in the window, and you can enjoy watching them. Having said that, you probably won't get a whole lot of honey stores until two things coincide. One, you've got an abundance of nectar out in the world for them to collect, and you've also got a strong colony of bees. When you open the window, you can see lots of bees. Either of those two things aren't there, then you won't actually get honey stored in your super. But as said, you can have some fun just watching them recycle a bit of wax on the frames, and it'll get them going a little bit earlier. One beekeeper we know, Daryl, likes to switch the top box and the bottom box for a little while in the beginning, so you got a lot of bees running over the flow frames, and he says that's a nice technique to get them really acquainted with the flow frames and get their smells and things on them and make them their own quicker. So you could do that, you could try that if you want to. As said, I do nothing, I just put them on top and wait till the bees are ready to use them.
Cedar, if you're installing a nuke now, it's spring here in Australia, would you expect to get honey into the flow frames?
So it really depends on how strong your colony is, how many eggs the queen's laying, and that's often dictated by how much nectar you've got available. If you've got a strong genetics and you've got a lot of nectar in the proximity within, say, a 3 kilometre radius, then the bees will bring in a lot, and that will stimulate the queen to lay more eggs, and the whole thing starts to happen very quickly. So it can get quite exciting in the springtime. You can get a box like this filled up in a week and ready to put the super on, and then in an extreme case, a few weeks later you're seeing honey in the windows. But you can also get the other issue, or the other experience happens often as well, where you installed the nuke, but then the flowers, the nectar wasn't available to them, the seasons changed, or perhaps the predominant species around you that was flowering with a lot of nectar finished, and it'll be a slow creep as they just collect whatever they can for a while until something else flowers. Sometimes you won't even get honey that season, you have to wait till next time there's an abundance of flowers, the next spring. Sometimes in some places, particularly inland here, you'll get a lot of flowers in the summertime. Here on the coast we actually get good flowers in the winter, so it really depends on your location and the season. Sometimes floods and fires can affect the flowering as well. So it, like anything in farming, the weather plays a big part, and the genetics plays a big part as well.
Jan's in Victoria, and just wondering, should she feed the new bees in the hive to get them started, and if so, what should she feed them?
Okay, ask around. You're in springtime here in Victoria. That'll be a bit behind us where we are, and it's likely you've got an abundance of flowers and you don't need to feed them. But ask around your local beekeepers and see if anyone else is doing any feeding, or perhaps if you're in that locale and you're online. My sister keeps bees down there in Melbourne, and you are likely this time of year to have an abundance of nectar and not need to feed, I would say. Here we've always got flowers of some sort around us, and we don't need to feed practically any time of year. But in those colder regions that do have a longer cold winter, it is common for people to feed their bees either prior to winter, so they've got stores to last through, or perhaps a commercial beekeeper will feed their bees in the early spring, which would be what they call a thin syrup of sugar water, just to stimulate them to start laying eggs and start getting going, to get a jump on the season so they can get out and collect more honey when the flowers do burst. So there are two reasons why people do feed, but in your location you probably don't need to.
So Sham's asking, how can you be sure that the honey in the inner frames is ready to extract?
Okay, you can't be 100% sure, but you can get a pretty good guess. And as you start to tune in on your hive and learn what's happening here and what's happening in the side windows, you'll start to notice when there's an abundance of nectar coming in. Now, I can still see nectar coming in here. If you have a look around at this side window, they are still going through their process of filling these cells with nectar and putting their capping on. So I know that there's still flowers and they're still filling, and if they're still filling on the outside here, it means they would have filled up the centre already. Now, if you've got the other issue where it was filling, but then you looked at the side and they actually ate all of that honey away, or some cells they were filling with nectar now are empty, then you might also assume that they have eaten some of the honey out of just above their brood nest to feed to their brood. So the centre frames can sometimes have an archway eaten out by the bees when the bees get hungry. But the pattern here in this windows and the side windows is the secret to knowing whether the bees are hungry and likely to have eaten some of the honey out of those centre frames above the brood nest.
Right. So Lee's asking, can look through the side windows. The bees had swarmed. Look through the side windows. It looks like they're putting in honey. I can see it into the flow frames, but they're just not capping them. Why would they not be capping it? And yet there seems to be quite a lot of honey in there.
Okay, so they will get around to capping it. They usually wait till the cells are full, and if they don't have quite enough nectar to get hold of, or it's getting a bit slow with the nectar flow, then it might be some time before they actually put the capping on. And sometimes they just get sick of waiting and they'll actually cap it sort of indented in the flow frames, because they've said, well, the honey's ready but there's no more available, we'll just cap that off as best we can. Other times when there is a nectar flow like this, you'll see they'll be drawing their wax further out beyond the flow frame surface and continuing to fill it up and capping it off further out. So a bit of patience, they will get to capping. If they don't, then they'll actually take out that nectar and consolidate it further in the hive or consume it.
There's a lot of patience in beekeeping, isn't there, Cedar?
There is a bit. It's always good to have a few hives, because this hive's doing really well, but perhaps this other hive isn't. And if you want to increase your chances of being able to harvest a lot of beautiful honey like this, then have more than one hive. It also allows you to do things like, if one hive loses its queen, you can transfer a frame from the other hive over to it, and if it's got eggs or really young larvae down the cells, they can raise a queen themselves. So it gives you some self-sufficiency there too, by having more than one hive. Now I'm going to show you how to turn this key. Now I had two keys, so I just used two keys. I didn't really have to. Let's assume you just had one. So back to a 90 like this, that was like that. Back to a 90, you take the key out. Now then we're going to change to the top slot and push all of those parts back down so the cells reform honeycomb pattern again. Now I've got that tool there. It's easy enough just to push back down to a 90, and the tip here is leave it like that for a minute or two if you can, and what that does is push the parts back together. So imagine you've turned the key in the bottom slot and it's done this, and you've created those channels. If you just do a quick close like that and move on, what you might find is the parts bounce back up, and then you've got a situation where they're not quite forming hexagons. The bees will still use them when they're not quite forming hexagons, but what you then get is a bit of wax down here, particularly in the bottom cell, and next time you go to open it, the channel's smaller because there's more wax in between the parts, and it can lead to spillage issues inside the hive. So leave that key there if you can for a little while, and that just makes sure those parts are getting pushed back into their correct position. You can see the bees doing their job here. This is the frame we're harvesting, and you can see they're already stripping off the capping in a few of these cells here. So they'll get to work. If they need to use those cells and there's a nectar flow, they'll rip all of that capping off in a day. If they don't really need to use it, they might not, and it could stay there for weeks with empty cells under their feet. So it really depends what the bees are up to. So now we can go ahead and do the other one. So top slot again, push it all the way. There's another tip, all the way to the back, and you'll feel it touch the back. It can't go any further. And then down to a 90, leave it like that for a minute or two. And there we have it. Beautiful jars of honey. There's 3 kilograms of honey there, which is amazing, from one single frame. And look, we've got beautiful amber light colour here, floral flavours, darker multi-tones here. It's just gorgeous.
How nice. More honey for the office. Cedar, Anthony's wondering, do bees hibernate in the winter, or do they just stop making honey because there's no flowers around?
So around here we don't really have a winter as far as the bees are concerned, because we're in a subtropical region, but in those areas where you do get a lot of snow, a bit of both happens. There's no flowers happening. What the bees do is they breed what's called fat bees, which are the worker bees, but they've got bigger fat bodies, and instead of lasting 4 to 6 weeks as foraging bees do, they could last up to 6 months to get you through a long cold winter. So they do go into a type of hibernation, as you say, where they form a ball and they just keep themselves warm. The queen stops laying and they just survive by eating the remaining honey in the hive, and hopefully there's enough there to keep them going through till when the flowers come out again, the weather warms up and your bees are away again. In those countries, not all hives will survive that time, and sometimes you get to the next spring and you'll need to repopulate that hive with a colony again.
Nice, Steve. We've got some great questions coming in today. Here's another one. Just MJ and AM tried to straighten some wax on a frame, the brood frame, and it fell off.
Ah, yes.
Which I know we've seen that before. Just wondering what to do if this happens, and do I need to straighten it?
Okay, so if this happens, you can either take that wax away. If it's only got some honey in it, then I wouldn't worry too much. Just take that away and enjoy it and eat it. If it's got brood in there, if you can see eggs or young larvae down the cells, then it'd be a nice idea to keep that in the hive. So if you've found that it's fallen off and you want to keep that part in the frame, what you do is get a couple of rubber bands that are big enough to stretch right around your frame like this, and you can use them just to hold that piece of wax in place. The bees will then connect it to the wooden surrounds, and they typically chew the rubber bands off and kick them out of the hive, and away you go. You've fixed that little bit of comb and saved it for the colony and straightened it up on the comb guide. So don't be shy, get in there and have a go, and you'll find with a little bit of help you can get them going nice and straight, and then your colony will follow suit after that.
As Deborah's just caught a swarm and want to move it about 20 metres into the yard. Just wondering, how soon do I need to move it?
Now, if you've just caught them today, then you can move them straight away on that day. And that's often what I like to do. Like you saw me a couple of weeks back on the palm tree here. I caught a swarm and I moved it straight to this position here, actually. And that meant that if any forager, any bees, scout bees from that swarm were going out to find colonies, they're less likely to come back and tell that swarm to move on to the tree hollow they found or whatever it is. So moving them straight away can be a good thing. Now, otherwise, if you leave them there for a number of days, they would have orientated to that spot, and you'll need to go through what beekeepers normally do when they're moving a hive, which is either you creep it a little bit by a little bit, just a metre or two at a time, and let the bees reorientate to that new spot and the bees will follow, or you can move it more than 4 miles, about 6 kilometres away for a month and then move it back to the new location, or you can move it right across your yard in one go and use the distraction technique with a bunch of branches at the entrance of the hive, or put an old t-shirt across the entrance, leaving gaps for the bees, but providing an obstacle to trigger reorientation of those bees to that new location. And that works. You'll still get 5% returning to the old spot. You can collect them with any kind of cardboard box or bee box and ferry them across every other day if you want to, or you can just let them find their own way. So, long answers. There's always a lot about beekeeping. It's a fascinating learning journey. We do have the beekeeper.org if you really want to sink your teeth in. We've got all of this information there in a step-by-step video tutorials. Also a great fundraiser, and by all means continue to ask questions every week. We're here to help you get started in beekeeping. If you do have answers to other people's questions, that's great. Chime in help answer. It's a fantastic thing to watch what is a global community help each other in beekeeping. I'm going to finish off this little process here. So I've done the job of closing the frame now, and I can put in this little cap here, which is just the cap that closes off this slot at the top. There we go. And if it can't quite go in all the way, it's because there's a protrusion here hitting the frame, and the frame hasn't been reset properly. So that little protrusion is to remind you that you haven't actually reset the frame properly for the bees. It worked quite nicely. When we were inventing it, we found we were forgetting. So we thought we'd better put in that little reminder mechanism. And here we go. We're just doing a hot swap from the tube to that little cap there. And you can just, well, it's so full, I won't be leaning that up. You can keep that to enjoy the spoils of tasting those flavours. And look at that, isn't that just something beautiful? Big jar of nice, in this case it's got the red tones of the heathland. Let's have a look at what this other jar is when we hold it up to the light. And the beautiful flavours that this hive has brought in. It's such an amazing thing. Did I say I love honey? Look at that. 2 gorgeous colours and flavours. That's about 3 kilograms each jar. So just beautiful. Thanks for watching. Tune in again, same time next week.